All right, so I'm going to talk about the Atlanta episode, which I believe is the 39th episode overall of the series, and the 8th episode of the 4th season, called The Goof Who Sat by the Door. I know previously, right before this, I released a video that sort of was joking about that and so forth. This is an actual review of it. It's more serious and everything. I'm not going to act like this is a real thing. However, people did. And this is not presented in any way that this is not what happened, unless you have any knowledge of, Disney's history and stuff like that, in which it becomes very obvious. Basically, the idea of this is the idea that a black animator mistakenly became the executive, the head of the Disney animation, the CEO of the Disney animation company, this guy named Thomas Washington, and he intended to make the blackest movie of all time, which would be a Goofy movie. Now, there's certain things of this, like the title of this episode comes from both the novel as well as the film called The Spook Who Sat by the Door, which is a big kind of blaxploitation. I don't know if they count it as blaxploitation or not, but it came out around that time, as well as it's sort of close to the style of the documentary Floyd Norman in Animated Life, who is a black animator at Disney, as well as how the CEO was appointed, is sort of close to what happened in the film Putney Swope, which is probably the most famous film from Robert Downey Sr. This was weird, and it was weird when it came out. But basically, what this takes is the idea that there'd been this long-held urban legend and belief that this movie was about, in this movie, Goofy was black, and it's about black fatherhood and the single fatherhood and stuff like that. As well as, and there's some validity to this, is that the actual creator of Goofy, you have to have a lot of, there's so many references in this that it's sort of crazy, but the creator of Goofy actually said something that is basically he compared Goofy to, I guess, a color boy or something. There's a quote in the episode from the creator of Goofy, and it's a real quote. I couldn't find the Sight and Sound article they mention in this, but it's a real quote that that's one of that quote he reads off about Goofy is an actual real quote, but it's been a belief for a long time. And so supposedly what happens is you have this very promising animator, a black animator who grows up in a not great area. He then goes to Disney. He goes to SCAD, then he goes to Disney, and then he becomes, by accident, they end up voting for the wrong person. He becomes CEO of Disney after Michael Eisner takes a sabbatical, and the previous guy dies. And he gets to be this huge black executive running Disney at their hugest cultural time. If you know anything about Disney, and the history of it, first off, they don't even mention Katzenberg, which I thought was funny. They kind of don't. There's certain things about this, if you know the history, that none of this makes any fucking sense. And it was such a trigger that I was wait a minute, Eisner just left. Eisner took a sabbatical. Fucking Eisner. Yeah, there's that part of it. And even the things with his son, time-wise, I'm wait, he graduated school in 1990. Goofy movie comes out in 95. And so he has a kid who's old enough to remember things. And, all this crazy stuff that's time-wise, none of this makes sense if you really think about it. I actually watched this twice and I was oh yeah, the time aspect of this doesn't really work. They kind of don't give you dates on things, so you're just going off vibes that this works, but let me tell you, it really doesn't. He did not graduate in 1990, get married, and supposedly they were married young, don't tell you if it was in college or not, and then have a kid, and that kid is, anyway, it doesn't really work. But you get so into it, you believe it. And this episode of Atlanta, which is sort of just a documentary about their weird theory on the Goofy movie, their theory on the Goofy movie, is really interesting, because I think one of the things about film culture we don't talk about, and it's something I actually think we should be reevaluating a lot, is there are certain films that are so important and influential on certain certain people or certain cultures or certain regions, and because they're not part of the main film narrative, we don't talk about them, or don't talk about them the way other people talk about them. I bring up a lot with this is The Wiz, and we look at like with the Oscars, there are people who are like, oh awesome, The Wiz is in there, that film means so much to me, and there are other people who are like, why the fuck would this be brought up so much? And like I've noticed there are people who feel like there's this list of the top 10 movies, and it's always The Godfather, Citizen Kane, or whatever, and I like those movies a lot actually, but there's obviously more to it. And I think what this film is doing is it's taking a film that obviously represents a certain thing to black culture, taking it and trying to explain why this is so important to a certain amount of people. And I like that about that. And I do think we need to have bigger discussions about we need to really change film culture and be more open to like, what if a film represents more to women and or represents more to, obviously in this case like black culture, and we're not acknowledging it because is a Goofy movie as important to the Disney Renaissance? Maybe not, but it's important to those to a lot of people, and maybe we should be acknowledging its importance in culture, even if that's not the culture that we personally are a part of. I still think it's interesting to talk about film and talk about its influence beyond just the main narrative of film, which seems to be the main thing that people are interested in, which I think this actually does a very good job on. I heard more discussion on a Goofy movie post this, but it's also that they took on this interesting idea of what if the Goofy movie was called the blackest movie of all time. And this is actually really funny. They have parts where like he's like the guy who's playing the main guy, Thomas Washington, does a great job when he is this guy, he's like explaining to them to like understand black people and draw black people, and this guy like walks in with crutches. He's like, see, I asked him to go beat some black people, he hung out, went to a cookout, said the wrong things, got his ass beat, but now he has that knowledge. I was like, that's really funny. So it's like, you got the cookout invitation and you fucked it up. Come on, man. As well as like the part where he's like drinking whiskey with Robert Townsend and Janet Jackson. I was like, come on. This is like the dream of everyone's black 90s kind of stuff. And that they got Brian McKnight to participate in it and all that. It just makes it feel so real, and like we're really there, and like this is a real documentary, and like why would someone make a fictitious version of Hollywood? But I kind of like the idea of it. But it's interesting like how they took like the whole idea of that the map means so much, and that's actually about them like doing like the green book thing and avoiding certain areas and being careful, as well as like the idea of like that the Bigfoot was put in there because they were actually going to find, I think it's like Huey Newton's chair, the Black Panther, which was just a big chair at the time, but I understand that it represents more. But like they're going to see this chair that represented all the stuff of the Black Panthers, but they cut that part out to be Bigfoot, because to them like black culture was a fantasy or something like that, which I thought was an interesting way to take it. It was funny, like the whole idea that Goofy would be shot by a cop in the car, that would be shot on stage at a major venue. Like all this crazy. I did like that they had different things, so it looked like development took a long time. Although the part where the guy, when you go back to the Robert Townsend, Janet Jackson thing, when he opened its door and he needed to ask him, and he said like, "Who ordered the white rice?" That was funny. How could you not get that joke? Anyway, this not only gets into the thing with Goofy movie where it represented this thing, people believed it to be this thing, people believed it to represent, people believed that it was like Goofy was a black father, that it was like this much more black movie than people were letting on. It was all the undercurrent. I don't hear that about the show that this is a spin-off from, which is interesting, but maybe there's expanded things. However, there's a big thing about the Goofy movie that we should talk about, and I think plays into this, and it plays into a way that I recognize. And I have looked at that movie because I saw it as a kid. It didn't mean as much to me. And I saw it as a parent. And I think this movie, there's a certain point where you're watching a Goofy movie and you used to be Max, right? And then you realize at a certain point you're Goofy now. And you as a parent aren't the cool kid who could be in Powerline. You're the guy who has to reprimand your kid for being Powerline. And that takes on a huge meaning in terms of like seeing his fishing trips with his son, and how the fishing trip in Goofy movie was supposed to be like this, obviously fictitious, but I mean Goofy movie is fictitious too, by the way. How that represents something, how his son meant so much to him, and how like I think, and I noticed this in Atlanta as well. There was that previous episode where about like the parents and their son's nanny. I haven't seen that in a while, so if I'm mispronouncing any of that, it happened in the season before, but both season 3 and 4 aired close together. They sort of talk about how like he felt there's a sense of feeling bad that the nanny's doing so much with the kid, and there's certain parental stuff like that. But I do think the idea with this is I think there's a certain thing about fathers and sons, and how things change over time, and there's often moments where your relationship with your dad is sort of changed and hurt, and you can't come back from that. And I did notice the part of this where Thomas Washington, the kind of break for him and his madness was not his drinking and his ego. I mean, that was part of it, obviously. But it was honestly that he raised his hand to his son was the end, was kind of the defining moment of his kind of decline. And I do think that represents something. And I think a lot of people think that when you do have kids is like you worry about your own, thinking back on things and thinking back on how things changed between you and your dad. And I think the fact that recognizing this, and I do like it for its meta quality, and obviously it's a film about a film and one that's playing around, so I'm going to love it for those reasons. And even having a cultural critic in there I thought was a nice touch and everything. But I often to be 100%, or to be, I don't know, I often find the ending, I know it's not real, and I find it kind of sad, because it's just that he lost his dad so his dad could make a film about himself, and how even his ex-wife saying how he just wanted to be friends with him and stuff like that. Like he just wanted to be a part and be like a friend with Goofy. And I've literally heard animators say it. I think that's a real thing. But I think this represents more about your feelings about the Goofy movie. I don't know. I sort of think it's a meta thing about Donald. I don't know, but I felt like through Donald Glover, through understanding what they thought the Goofy movie was and what a Goofy movie means to them as they grow older. And I think all of that is in here. And I think it's actually one of the smarter, more interesting kind of statements on a film, of the film, and what it represents and what it means to someone, and what they hope it would mean and what it really means as you get older. I think this is an insanely great episode of the show. I know no one is in it, and it's a weird thing, but I think it is a really wonderful episode, and one that always kind of takes me aback, both by both its audacity and how well it sort of nails a movie that ended up meaning a lot more than I think Kevin Lehman all then thought it would, and seemed to be pretty cool about in the end. But it's a great episode, and if you're watching the new Goofy movie documentary, I would recommend checking this one out definitely as well.